Candidates, everyone tested your microphones?
Hello? Hello? Yeah.
You all know that they all work? Okay.
Good.
Hello?
Claudia, you ready? Go. Okay, everyone, this is live streaming, so we need quiet in the audience and we need to get started promptly. Thank you.
Welcome to the BOE Candidate Debate Forum. My name is Nicole Josie. I am co-president of the President's Council for SOMSD. I've served over 7 years in various positions, volunteering through PTAs as well as CPAC roles. And tonight we ask that the 7 BOE candidates come to speak. As a parent, like most of you, we've sat and watched so many things transpire in the district over the past couple of years, so we know that this election is extremely important in moving our district forward. And I am personally eager and looking forward to hearing from each one of our candidates tonight, as I'm sure all of you are as well. So let's get started. I'm going to introduce our moderator, Joan Stern. She is a trained League of Women Voter moderator since 2018. Joan has moderated debates for the League both in person, like tonight, and in recent years also virtually. Joan is here tonight representing the League of the Morris area. Joan believes educating and informing voters of who their candidates are for upcoming elections and where they stand on important issues and concerns to the voters is of utmost importance and is delighted to be a part of that process. Joan, thank you for moderating for us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you, and welcome everyone. We were just picking numbers who's going to go first from the cards, and when you're talking about cards, I love a full house. So thank you all for being here, and I appreciate your time. I was just marking down what everyone's order is. So thank you to the President's Council of South Orange, Maplewood, and to the League of Women Voters here for Maplewood, South Orange, for hosting tonight's candidate forum. Also, welcome to the South Orange Maplewood voters for joining us tonight in person. All of you, thank you so much for coming out. And for those of you joining us live stream on the YouTube channel President's Council W6C. And we're especially appreciative to have the BOE candidates here with us tonight to answer some of their voters' most pressing questions. I'm pleased to be with you tonight. My name is Joan Sturm, as your League of Women Voters moderator. This candidate forum is devoted to hearing the views of candidates running for South Orange Maplewood Board of Education. It is one of the League of Women Voters' primary responsibilities to ensure that voters are informed of who is on their ballot in a nonpartisan forum such as tonight. I'm going to jump ahead in my notes, which is to say that no photography or recording is allowed tonight. So I'm going to ask anyone who's taking pictures, with the exception of the League member who is assigned here to do that. Thank you. The League of Women Voters of New Jersey is a nonpartisan, nonprofit political organization that works to empower voters. It was founded 100 years ago, and we make democracy work by protecting voting rights and encouraging robust participation. Elections and voting are core concerns for the League. Leagues are committed to providing fact-based information about issues and the positions candidates take on those issues, all to help voters like yourselves make their own decisions and participate in the electoral process. The League of Women Voters never supports or opposes candidates for office or political parties. Any use of the League name or a footage from tonight's forum in campaign materials, literature, or advertising of any kind, both digital or recording, has not been authorized by the League of Women Voters and may not be used for any purpose. As a courtesy to the candidates, please, everyone, take this opportunity to either turn off or at least silence your cell phones, other devices, even your watches that can beep now. Thank you. All photographs or any recordings will not be allowed at the forum. Voters in the community have had an opportunity to submit their questions via a Google form online, and these varied questions have been reviewed by the League and this evening's hosts for clarity, length, and language. This is an attempt to consolidate multiple questions that were similar on one topic into a single question. Your specific question may not be asked, but it is represented by the questions we are asking. To ensure that the meeting is informative and finishes in the allotted time, since we are streaming live, it does cut off sharply at 9. If there is any person here tonight who is writing a question on an index card that we have provided to you, if you do not have one, raise your hand. A league person will give you an index card. You simply raise your hand when the question is on the card, clearly give it to a league person, it'll be brought up here. The questions should only address those issues that pertain to the office that they are running for and not personalities. I, as the moderator and league representative, cannot allow any abusive, personalized, or irrelevant questions or remarks. In order to avoid personal attacks, redundancy, and to ensure that we have a range of topics that we're talking about, a screening committee will quickly review the questions before they hand them to me to incorporate into the questions I already have from the voters. Please understand we will do our best in the time that we have allotted tonight. Now, before we get started, I would like to share with you the structure of the evening, which the candidates are aware of, which is why I'm talking to you and not looking at the candidates, because I've already discussed this with the candidates, and they're all in agreement and excited about the format. Each candidate will have an opportunity for a 1-minute opening statement. Each candidate has drawn a number to determine the order that their opening and closing statements will be given. I, the moderator, will then ask each of the candidates to answer a question submitted from the community. Questions have not been shared with the candidates in advance. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question. In order to ensure that each candidate has an equal exposure and opportunity to respond first, middle, and last to questions, I have arranged a very fancy grid which rotates who has asked the question in what order. Therefore, with the exception of the first person to answer each question, no candidate gets an advance in anticipating their order of answering the questions. You'll see how it works. It basically keeps everyone on their toes and makes for a really exciting candidates forum. Following the Q&A session, each candidate will deliver a 1-minute closing statement. The timekeeper here is Laura Weiss. She's raising her hand. She will hold up an orange sign or yellow sign, which gives a 30-second warning to the candidates. She will hold it up long enough so they can see it, but she's not going to hold it up the whole 30 seconds. She will then hold up a red sign which says stop, which means time is up. Candidates are allowed to finish their sentences. Time limits are strictly enforced. Candidates, what that means is no run-on sentences, just complete the sentence. And if I do find that you're going over, I'm going to have to say thank you to be fair to each of you. After a candidate responds, this is for the audience, there will be no discussion from the audience. I know it's not easy to do. I know you want to cheer and get excited or moan, but I'm going to ask you really to hold that to yourselves so that we can move along in the time allotted and hear equally from each candidate. We ask that you hold the applause until the end of the forum. I'll let you know when you can do that. So with that, we will start with our opening comments. And the candidates have had an opportunity to pre-prepare them, so they may be reading them or they may just speaking off the cuff, whatever they chose to do. They have 1 minute. I want to make sure that in the beginning, I may just check with the timer a few times just to make sure that she's comfortable with the way the flow is, and that at a certain point you can kind of let me know and I won't keep checking in with you. Okay? So we're going to start with, and I just also wanted to say that the individuals, the candidates are seated in alphabetical order, but that has nothing to do with the order that they have selected for their opening and closing comments. It also has nothing to do with the way I will answer the questions. It just helps you from knowing on the ballot who they are, because I know that it's not that easy from this distance to see their names. So because of that, when they start their introduction, I'm going to ask each candidate to clearly say their full name, and if they need to, they can spell it as it appears on the ballot, okay? Both for the opening and if you feel you need to do it for the closing too, but not every time they answer a question. I will be referring to them by name when I ask them the question. So are we ready to get started with opening comments, candidates? Great. So we're going to start with and I'm going to ask that as I get started, help me if I say it wrong, and if I continue to get it wrong, someone in the audience can shoot me, but I'm really going to try to get these names right. I'm not from this area. I'm from Morristown, so I don't know any of the candidates. I don't know their names, and so I'm really going to try to get them right. So the first one should be pretty easy to get right because it's Mr. Steffen, correct?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Steffen, please share with us your opening statements, and please state, as I will say for everyone, don't start the timers yet. State your full name if you want to spell it, as it will be seen on the ballot sometime during your opening.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I'm Paul Steffen. I'm an environmental attorney, and I'm a former New Jersey public school teacher. In the past few months, I've had the opportunity to talk to hundreds of community members, and I've heard two things very clearly. I've heard a deep pride in this district and in its teachers, and I've heard frustration over recent layoffs, over struggles to get the basics right, over the conflicts of adults pulling attention away from the needs of our kids. I think that every student, no matter their background or their abilities, deserves to be met where they are and to leave school every day a little better than when they came in. That's a big task, and a single board member can't do it by themselves. It requires us to work together, to listen to each other, to bring out the best in ourselves so that we can deliver the best for kids. And that is what I'm committed to doing if I'm elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steffen. Next is Ms. Joseph.
I need longer arms to reach that. Good evening, I'm Bethany Joseph, and I'm here tonight as a parent, a social worker, a lesbian, a community member, a business owner. I have a Columbia High School sophomore, and I have a sophomore in college who was a graduate in class of 22. And I am from the class of 87 from Columbia High School, which means I look darn good for my age. I'm here for all of you, for the question askers, for the folks thinking past tomorrow, as a person in the community who's willing to really put their neck out to try and help us do better by our kids, because at the end of the day, that's what this is about, the kids. I'm going to answer questions to the best of my ability and hope that if you have more questions, please reach out directly. Social media, let's talk. I'm here to talk about public education. I want to talk about our pain points, think about what the BOE is charged with doing so that we can move forward together to solve the issues and grow our district. Our district includes our wonderful teachers, our students, our families. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Joseph. Next, we'll be hearing from Mr. Valmani. Valmani? Valdemani. I didn't see my D. Okay, Valdemani. Thank you.
No, that's not correct. It's Vadlamani.
Say it again.
Vadlamani.
Vadlamani. Okay. You'll give me 3 times on this, right, before you kick me out? Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Arun Vadlamani, and I'm currently on the Board of Education. When I was elected to the board 3 years back, I imagined that I would spend my time writing policies, improving facilities, overseeing the curriculum. Instead, I spent precious time protecting our high school principal, hiring a superintendent, implementing a budget, and rebuilding the district. All of this while collaborating with my fellow board members. I am rerunning for the board because I see stability on the horizon and the possibility of making a lasting positive impact on our district. We still have a lot of work to do, and I'm eager to do it. We have certainly made steady progress this year, but work must continue to reduce chronic absenteeism and ensure our female student athletes have suitable facilities. And our teachers must get a fair deal without bankrupting the district. I'm here at the forum asking you to re-elect me so that I can continue improving student outcomes and stabilizing the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll be hearing from Mr. Tellisford. Okay.
Good evening. My name is Kwawe Tellisford. I've served on the board since 2022. I joined the board because I want kids to have a great education. And as a product of this school district, I know firsthand what a great education, how that can shape your future. This community has always been special to me, and that's why I and many of us come back to raise our families here. Since joining the board, I've focused on building collaborative relationships in order to focus on building and improving student outcomes. And that has led to the creation of things like the data committee, which has changed our discussions instead of just being scores and demographics to having true stories about the student in their own unique way. We also have things like our long-range facilities plan, which is about improving our school district. And all these projects are on track, and they're ahead of, either on schedule or ahead of schedule. All this work involves close relationships with the administration and our superintendent, and this is to ensure things move in a positive direction. I'm running again because I believe in progress that we've made, and I'm committed to continuing that work to ensure that every student thrives in a supportive and inclusive environment.
Thank you. Next will be Ms. Brown.
Hi, thank you for having us tonight. My name is Deirdre Brown. My husband and I moved to Maplewood when my son was entering kindergarten and my daughter 4th grade. Today, my son is in 8th grade and my daughter is a 12th grader. And we've certainly had some wonderful experiences in the district and see its potential. For example, we've had devoted and talented teachers. At the same time, we've experienced frustration and confusion, especially last year in the fall when there was a push to de-level and get rid of honors programs in the district, as well as the terrible treatment of our beloved principal, Mr. Frank Sanchez. I was a huge Friends of Frank supporter. I want to be part of the solution of getting our district back on track. I do policy for a living, and I believe that will serve me well to serve on the BOE. I understand the importance of policy governance and accountability. We have a chance for a new beginning with our new superintendent and with new leadership that will engage teachers, parents, and students. Our community, Maplewood South Orange, is awesome.
Thank
and
you.
I want to be part of creating a district that represents that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. And then last, we will, we have two more. We have Mr. Bennett going next.
Hello, my name is Jeff Bennett. You might know that I was on the Board of Education for almost 4 years, about a decade ago. Some of you may not know that I was also a public school teacher before becoming a board member before. My previous Board of Education service gives me a great deal of institutional knowledge of this district, plus knowledge of education law, and particularly school finance and state aid, which is something that I think will be very important for this district as we face what I think will be a fiscal headwind the next few years. I was on the Board of Education when I was in my early 30s and didn't have kids. Now I have 3 in kindergarten, 3rd grade, and 6th grade, who've gone from public pre-K to middle school and use different educational programs, including special services. I'm also the only candidate whose kids were placed by the III and who frankly has gone through its ups and downs, including 2 years of bus problems. 2 years ago, my son had no bus, and last year, the only times his bus wasn't late were the days it didn't show up at all. 12 years ago when I was on the board, our district had many problems too, but there was nothing like the fracturing shock that was a Sanchez trial.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And then finally, we have Mr. Capata.
Thank you for having us this evening. My name is Bimal Kapadia. My wife Swati and I moved here in 2016 from NYC. We fell in love with SOMA because of its true diversity, the backgrounds, the professions, the arts. It's the identity and the DNA of this town, and it vibrates with creativity. My sons Nikhil and Sayan entered the district during COVID, and like most parents, we all experienced a tumultuousness during those Frankenstein years. Some of those impacts are still being felt. But fast forward, and now they are in 3rd and 4th graders at South Mountain. Their enthusiasm for school is inspiring, and their teachers have been wonderful, which is always a cause for optimism and why I'm running. You see, I'm a public school kid, and I'm a product of the arts. In fact, my mom was a painter, and the arts were a big part of my education, including getting a minor in art and art history. Now I'm an entrepreneur and a co-founder of a creative studio, responsible for the day-to-day operations and communications, skills that are needed to hold our district accountable and ultimately improve the climate for students.
Thank you. So we are now ready to get into what everyone is here for and we're all excited about, and that is the questions. Now, the key themes that we will be addressing tonight include budget, equity, and the Intentional Integration Initiative, III, special ed, transportation, and the functioning of the BOE. Should be no surprises here. These are all the ones that you thought would be the hot issues. So first, the first person who will be answering this, and I'm gonna, just so you can get comfortable, you will see an order for this first round. I'm not gonna give you any hints, but after the first two, you'll start to know what it is. So, the first person is Mr. Bennett. And this is gonna be for all of you. The question is, all three campaigns have published thoughtful summaries of their platforms and key issues. As an individual candidate, what do you consider to be the single biggest, most urgent issue facing our school district today? And how do you see the role of the Board of Ed in addressing that issue? And you each have 1 minute to respond as we go around the room. Mr. Bennett.
I think the district's most significant issue is the achievement gap or outcome gap or opportunity gap, wherever you want to see it. I think that is like the North Star issue. Like that's the issue that we should have always in our minds when we decide on various policies we might do. That issue, though, is something that has been longstanding. Like it's something that's become very prominent since the early 2000s. There's not a single policy we can change that would close those gaps. I think there are certain issues which are under the board's direct control and that the board can perhaps invest like more time in. That would include like, getting the III right. I think the program we have creates a lot of unnecessary stress. Facing the budget, which also relates to equity. The III relates to equity too. And, getting curriculum right, like having a curriculum which is more exciting for kids, which is up to date in our rapidly changing world. We also, unfortunately, unlike 12 years ago in Iran, like we have to think about basics such as, the CHS schedule, sports fields, and a bus system that's reliable.
Thank you, Mr. Bennett. Excellent with the timing. I'm just gonna, is it possible to move the microphone closer? I just think he was a little hard to hear. I didn't want to interrupt him in the middle of his thought. Can the microphones be moved a little closer?
They're stationary.
They're stationary. So maybe just for future answers, just try to speak up a little louder so that it's a little easier to hear. Great, but thank you. Next will be, and here's the key to the order, just for the first round, Ms. Brown.
So I think that obviously getting the budget right, I think we are expecting a budget constrained environment in the next few years, and we need that to support anything else that our district does. So getting that right, having transparency, having accountability, understanding our assumptions and making sure they're sound is really important. Then getting our district back to academics and academic excellence. And what that means is meeting each child's diverse needs, not a one-fits-all approach. So that means making progress on our Fergus recommendations, making progress on our special education recommendations, building up our arts programs, supporting our student athletes with fields and facilities that they can keep them safe and bring school spirit. So it's about getting back to the basics for our district, which is about serving our students, academic excellence, and getting our budget right so that we can support that. And I'll add, teachers are the backbone of our district. So we need to really make sure we support them.
Thank you. Thank you. Have you figured it out yet? Next will be Ms. Joseph.
So I'm going to have a different sort of answer to this. I think that what the most pressing issue for us is passion. Passion without guardrails is chaos. And what we've had for a little while now has been chaos. The board needs to function properly, needs to function efficiently, and needs to function on behalf of our students. It impacts everything that we do. Coming to meetings and seeing people yelling, some of the acrimony, it's a little heartbreaking, frankly. We can do better. All of us can do better. I can do better. I'm not talking at anybody. I'm with. I think that we have a terrific new superintendent and we need to support him and guide him. And we have an opportunity to really do a great, great job this year in particular, which is why I'm running. This is the time to do it.
Thank you, Ms. Joseph. Next, you got it, Mr. Kapadia.
Similar to what my running mates, Jeff and Deirdre, had mentioned on the academics and some of the other priorities, I think the number one thing that we've got to focus here is just reestablishing the climate at the board. It's a trickle-down effect with when you have new leadership and you have a new board members coming in, you have a chance to reset the climate and the role of the Board of Education as it relates to everything here in the district. But us also comes with oversight, that comes with honesty, and that comes with accountability. So we always have to lead by example. But that also means a thorough budget planning process, rigorous planning in all the projects that we do, effective execution. But the most important thing here is the timely and transparent communication to the parents, to the students, to the district. It's been too opaque for the last few years, and now we have to bring it back to something where it's open and public.
Thank you. Next, yes, Mr. Steffen.
Thank you. We need to get our relationships right, and that's because everything else flows from that. Key to that is the board's relationship with the superintendent, the board's only employee. The board's role, in my view, is not to dictate to the superintendent because the superintendent is a professional while we are not. The board's role is also not to rubber stamp the superintendent because we are the voice of the community and the democratically elected element of district governance. Rather, it's to be a partner with the superintendent, to set goals, to ask tough questions, to look at data and make recommendations, and to bring community concerns to the attention of the superintendent. That's got to be the key. And it's not just relationships with the superintendent, it's with teachers, it's with community members. I submit to you, I think I know how to do that. I have been a teacher, I know what they care about and what they need. I've spoken to a lot of community members, and I will continue to listen to your voices if elected. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steffen. You figured it out. Next, Mr. Telesford.
All right, I think the most important thing pressing our district is the need for stability. We've seen what happens when you pluck a single administrator out of a building, namely our high school, and that can be caused by actions by our board members. And the instability that it causes has downstream effects. One thing you're going to hear when I talk about downstream effects is there's always a cascading effect based on our decisions. And that comes from not respecting that chain of command, not respecting the administrators and the fact that they are professionals. In the last 10 years, we've had 6 superintendents. And with every new superintendent, whether they're interim or a full-time superintendent, they bring new ideas, and that means change. And that change means instability, so it is difficult to move our priorities forward if we're constantly changing. So the most important thing that we must do is remain stable so that we can build a strong foundation and then move forward.
Thank you. And then last, to answer the same question, Mr. Valdemani.
So during, World War II, then General Eisenhower, he kind of divided all his issues into important and urgent. What is important need not be urgent and vice versa, right? Achievement grab is great. It is extremely important. That's what we strive for. But that's not a most pressing thing right now. The most pressing thing right now are 3 as far as I'm concerned. Number 1 is stability. Number 2 is recruitment. And number 3 is capacity. So I'll explain what that is. Stability, Dr. Telesford made a great statement about what stability is. That's number 1. Number 2 is 1/3 of our teachers are going to retire in the next 5 years. We need to make sure that we are on a recruiting platform and make sure that entry-level teachers are given a very high salary so they can come and join our district. And number 3, by capacity, what I mean is that we have many single points of failure in our district. Our transportation director resigned last year, and we had buses that were not working. So those are the top 3.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, now it's going to get fun. I gave you a chance to answer the questions in order. Now this is the fun part. So the only person who will know that they're going will be the first person, and then the others will be called upon. So the first person to answer this question is Mr. Telesford. Okay. There's a lot of differing opinions and viewpoints in our community and on the Board of Ed. Can you share an example of how you have handled a conflict or disagreement within a team or a community, What was your role in bringing about a mutually beneficial outcome for all parties?
So on the board, one of the committees that I started was the data committee. And we know we have very different views. And in creating that committee, we actually had full discussions where we could talk about what is the most important thing, recognizing that our job is to improve student outcomes. And so for our early discussions, even though you could say that there are factions on the board, when we had those discussions, when we focused on students and saying, okay, why is a student failing? When we have that same focus and that singular point, then we can actually move forward on full discussions. And we moved from having discussions about where we say, how many students are failing, what are their demographics, to saying, okay, why are students failing? And then because of that, we now see the administration has moved in how they treat this student achievement, making sure that we focus on the whole student and look at them holistically. Because for one student, it may be academic. For other student, it may be something that is something at home.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Steffen, same question.
Thank you. And I'll note, he is a doctor. He's too nice to say it. Sure. I deal with conflicts all the time as a lawyer. A couple months ago, I walked into a meeting with opposing counsel, and it started with opposing counsel threatening me and saying they were going to go to the court and never work with me again. It ended with an agreement and a deal and a path forward. How do you do that? Well, it starts with listening. If anyone has read Nancy Pelosi's recent book, you'll learn that a lot of governance is about listening to people, understanding where they're coming from. And it's about how do you show up in a space. Somebody might be 80% wrong about something, but 20% right. And you have a real choice. Do you focus on the 80% that's wrong and show them why you're smarter than them and they haven't thought things through as well as you have? Or do you try to work with the part that you think they're onto something? And maybe that turns into you changing your mind. Maybe it turns into you refining your own ideas. But I think we do need to really work on how we relate to each other, how we listen to each other. The board only operates well, really, when we can get 9 members on board with something to give clear direction to the superintendent. We've got
Thank
to
you.
focus on that.
Thank you. Mr. Kapadia, same question.
Well, the good thing is I negotiate for a living. And so the way I've always approached any of my deals that I've worked on, it's never coming from a perspective of I'm looking to get this and I'm looking to get one over on the person. Actually, if you come out with the outcome that both people are going to feel like they've won, then that is the right outcome to come to. So if you already know that there is a certain level of an outcome that you would like, call it a dollar amount, and you know the other side wants to get to a certain dollar amount, well, then don't start on such polar sides of the equation. Bring yourself to a logical point that gets you to the middle, because you know you're going to end up there. There's no sense in sprinting to the middle way late in the game when it's already now pressures are cooked, tempers are hot, and now everyone starts to get a little bit emotional. So if you can actually establish what that middle ground is, knowing that there's a little bit of a variance, that is the best way to get to an outcome. Dealing with lots of different people, that's lots of different personalities, that's lots of different ways to work. A one-size-fits-all model doesn't work. Get to know the other person, knows are the things that how they work.
Thank you. Mr. Vadlamani, same question.
So one thing I learned very quickly on the board is that individual heroics only go so far. At some point, you have to talk to the people who you may disagree with 90% of the time, but where you agree on the 10% and move forward to make sure that you, at the end of it, do not forget that you're doing this for the children. As long as you have student outcomes in mind, everything else just kind of falls into place. And I'll now walk right into a huge controversy for our town is when I was on FFT, when I was a FFT chair this year, and we had this thing about how to deal with the reserve turf versus grass issue, right? So on the board itself, we had many people, differing opinions. On the board, obviously the community, and one of the things that I did to make sure that we all worked together was to put up the facts up there, look at what is happening, and make sure that all voices come together. And then at the end of the whole exercise, everyone, the board voted unanimously on one side. I mean, there were many different opinions, but they worked together.
Thank you. Ms. Joseph. That same question.
Thank God. If it changed then, I was going to be up a creek. I worked as a social worker, case management during the COVID crisis in an acute care hospital. And every day there were crises, and every day there were conflicts that arose from people not being able to come in and see their family member, people that were reluctant to say goodbye to a family member. And there were a team of us, the palliative care team, and we would work with families, thinking of one in particular who had both their mother and their father on life support. And the family was listening in part. They were having a hard time, as you might imagine. My role was to come in and to be the, for lack of a better word, a negotiator, an explainer, a good listener, an ally, and to get them to a point where they felt comfortable, not only with the advice that they were getting, but also with saying goodbye. It was painful for all of us, but it was
Thank you.
really important work.
Thank you. Ms. Brown.
So in my day job, I evaluate public programs, federal programs. And so quite often, there's a lot of decisions to be made around how do we design it? How big do we make our research questions? What are the methodologies we use to answer our research questions? And a lot of that, there can be disagreements on how big to make something, how small to design the project. And a lot of it involves bringing in your stakeholders. So bringing in the people that have a stake in what you're studying to understand their points of view. And yes, it's about listening. It's about being calm and collegial. And sometimes it's about compromising. You know, and I think part of it is if you listen to try and understand people's concerns, you can usually come to a resolution that people feel okay with. And I think that's a real lesson that we need to take in our district. We need to bring on our teachers when we're thinking about policies that we want to implement to get their understanding of how it would affect them and how practical it is. And
Thank you. Thank you. And then finally, Mr. Bennett.
So you hear a lot about factions on the South Orange Maplewood Board of Education, but we should remember that the board votes together 98% of the time, and the board is very united on what its goals and direction are for the district. The candidates here really, in some ways aren't very far apart. If we were in a different district, it's possible that we would be running together and not, frankly, against each other. When you do have a Board of Education, you're going to have some disagreements, and that's normal and sometimes very healthy. But if you disagree, you have to disagree politely. That means you shouldn't accuse your opponent of being ignorant. You shouldn't interrupt them if they're making a point. You should accept the good faith of the arguments they're making. Like in communications, you should respond to emails as politely as possible. An example of working together for my first term was at G&T. The district's G&T program was very weak in my first term, and a number of board members wanted to strengthen it. So we worked together. It took a long time. It took a whole year, and the administration had a big role too. But we actually worked together over a year for a good compromise. It didn't have pullout, but it did have
Thank
cluster rotation. It had academic
Thank you.
teams, twice exceptional kids, identification, and acceleration.
Thank you. Thank you. I know it's hard to answer the questions in a minute, so I appreciate you all trying, and the audience should be impressed. I'm sure you're all going, I could never do that. So be impressed with how hard this is, especially when they're not prepared for the question. And even sometimes I'm not prepared for the question. Like the next one I'm going to read, I just got from the audience. So I think this is the right time to ask it. So the first person to answer this will be Ms. Brown. Okay, here it is. Is there a current board policy that you are against? What is it, and how will you fix it?
I'm not sure this qualifies as a policy per se, but I think it might. I think that we can do better with the way that we are transporting our students around the district. I certainly believe in the intentional integration initiative. I just think we can be smarter in terms of being more sympathetic or empathetic to family hardships. I think we can take action to remove isolated placements of students. I mean, I do think there's an emotional effect and a social effect on students when they're the only kid in their block or in their neighborhood that are going to a separate school. And I think we can be more cost effective, but still rebalance our schools in the way that we want to.
Thank you. Next, to answer the question, Ms. Joseph.
Thank you. I actually think that there's a policy that's missing. So I'm going to reframe the question as social workers tend to do. When I was on the board and the chair of the board for the South Mountain YMCA, one of the things that came to light was there was no requirement for board members to actually come to board meetings. And we changed that. And we had to put a rule in that if you were going to serve on the board, you needed to be present for a certain number of board meetings, for committee meetings, and for events. And I would like to see that as part of your obligation to the Board of Education. We have 7 people running for 3 seats, which means 4 people, because I can do this math even as a social worker. 4 of us are not going to get onto the board, and we want to serve. So if you're going to take a spot, you're going to be one of the 9 on the horseshoe, show up for the students, show up for the parents, show up for the district, show up for the teachers. You have to be present.
Thank you. Mr. Telesford, next, to answer the question.
Thinking about being against a policy, I wouldn't say I'm against any policies, and I would actually think that that is not the approach that a board member should have when they join the board, saying I'm against a policy and I want to change it, because that is a very, I guess, tunnel vision approach to collaboration. The most important thing is to recognize that we are 9 members, and you can say, I see problems with this policy, and then you need to start talking to your fellow board members, talking with administration and say, hey, is this something that we can make changes to? But the idea of this policy is bad or wrong and I need to fix it is, I think, the wrong approach to joining the board. And I think anyone that has that attitude will run into a lot of problems. And I think that is not the best way to approach policy. Join the board, see the policies that are there, see how they're working out, and then if you see that there are issues, then start talking to your fellow board members about, are there ways that we can collaborate to make changes to this policy?
Thank you. Mr. Kapadia.
I think a policy that should get changed is also a direct byproduct of the way it's structured. So one of the policies or structure I would want to change right away in the board is, why do we need to have an executive leadership council within the board itself? It's only 9 people on the board. Why do you need three executive leaders when you're trying to move towards something that's of transparency and public and open for everybody? Then you create an environment where information becomes currency, and that's actually very counterproductive, which then leads to rush policies where you would say last year there was a policy to almost vote for a de-leveling policy in the district, or a rush policy to approve a budget that led to 28 staffing removed, art reductions, and all kinds of repercussions thereafter.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett, next to answer the question.
There are no policies that I oppose in full, but there are some policies that I oppose in part. One policy that I think we do need to adjust in the future is pre-K busing, because it's incredibly expensive to bus kids who are at schools with like 20 to 40 kids, because there are only a few kids per school who are eligible for a bus. So you end up busing, you have buses that just have a handful of kids on them, but they're like full buses with 54 seats. And last year we had 139 pre-K kids assigned to school buses on 13 routes, and 6 of those 13 routes were untiered, meaning we were spending over $130,000 to bus a handful of kids. We know we've got physical problems. I think that is an area we need to make some adjustments to. Another thing I disagree with is something the board hasn't done. The board has not passed a resolution on the unfair way that New Jersey calculates equalization aid. That's an extremely important issue, but very low profile. Like, nobody understands the problem. And I think this is a big district. We're a high prominence board. I think that if we passed a resolution to change the formula for equalization aid, we could start to get the ball rolling.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Vadlamani.
So I completely agree with Dr. Telesford here, in the sense that if you are going to get onto the board with the intention of saying that I want to get rid of that policy, that itself is a problem in itself, because the policies have been developed over many years with a historical nod towards where we are, what our values are. At the end of it, every policy reflects who we are. So walking in there and saying that I want to get rid of X or Y just kind of shows either A, you haven't done the homework there, or B, you don't even understand it properly. But one place I definitely want to spend time, all policy where I would like to shore up is all about our special education policy. Is that during our first year on the board, we started a special ed committee as an ad hoc committee, and Dr. Telesford was the chair of it. And this year, we made sure it became a full committee because it deserves the respect as any other committee. So we have an audit that's come out and which we're going to be presenting soon, and that obviously is not pretty. And I would like to make sure that it is fixed in the, I'm sorry, I'm looking at the red
No,
one
you
and
can
getting
finish
a
your
little
sentence.
scared. But make sure that the policy is updated to take care of all situations in special education.
Thank you. And last will be Mr. Stefan.
There's not a particular policy that I have in mind that I would want to repeal. I'm thinking a lot about implementation of policy. In a sense, it's somewhat easy to pass a policy. The board does it at every meeting. But it just becomes words on a piece of paper if we don't have a real idea of what it's going to look like in the classroom. Now, I used to be a teacher. I have some sense of what things are going to look like on the ground, and there are plenty of teachers in our district that we can talk to and we ought to talk to and consult on before we impose things that are going to affect their day-to-day teaching. Policy is another place where we have a lot of opportunity to work with the superintendent. The board is, in a way, sort of looking through a pinhole and only sees a little bit of what it thinks it's trying to do, but the superintendent is on the other side of that wall. What are pinholes through? Are they through walls? Anyway, the superintendent's on the other side and can see much more. And so this is really a space in policymaking where we need to be working very closely with the superintendent, making sure that we're not having unintended consequences to the things we're doing.
Thank you. So lucky me, the next question is one that we already had from the community, but we received another question that was related, and I thought said it really nicely. So I'm going to say both questions, but it's on the same topic. And it happens to be a topic that a few of you brought up as what you thought was the number one issue. No big surprise, transportation. So the first one to answer this will be Mr. Kapadia. Here's the two-part question. Transportation continues to be a logistics challenge and a community hot button. Although the BOE is not responsible for the day-to-day operations of the district, are there any steps or actions that you think the BOE can take to help address this? And this is what a specific individual said on the same topic that I'm sure multiple people feel. The young parents I know are very concerned about the busing issue. They support integration, but feel strongly about having their children in their neighborhood schools, which is what brought them to SOMA or SOMA. What are your feelings on keeping children in the schools close to home? So it is a two-part issue, but the second part is part of what's causing the problem in the first part. So, Mr. Kapadia. Oh, read it, the second part of the whole thing. Okay. The second part is, the young parents I know are very concerned about the busing issue. They support integration, but feel strongly about having their children in their neighborhood schools, which is what brought them to SOMA. What are your feelings on keeping children in schools close to home? And in talking about this, I'm going to ask you to also address the transportation issue since they are so linked. So, Mr. Kapadia, you go first.
So I think one of the first things that we have to look at is now we're almost 3 years into the transportation process. And I think you actually have time now to look at the data. How is the transportation and the busing initiatives that we're doing, how is that impacting the student outcomes? It's not to challenge the intent of the transportation or the initiative. It is actually to understand it better, to optimize it. I think with that data, you also have the ability to actually talk to the parents in a much grander scale to see how they are being impacted. The story that you mentioned of the one person, that's more than one person that's being impacted. Transportation can be a hardship. We shouldn't look away from that. And it needs to have the right modifications and understanding as you're speaking to the students, because in a busing situation where they are being displaced from farther away from home, it can create other challenges. particularly to the parents that are trying to get them 30 minutes across town to get there. It could cause isolation because they're the only one on their block that's not there. Again, it's not to do away with it, it's to understand what's happening.
Thank you. Mr. Vadlamani. Same question.
So both my wife and I work pretty long hours, and we would not have been able to send our kids out to the elementary school without busing. Let's get real about that. That was extremely important. And I mean, I will jump in and take 100% credit for making sure that we brought up busing for all elementary children who live more than 1 mile away from school. We went to the Board of School Estimates. This happened in November of 2022. We went to the Board of School Estimates, and looking at the numbers then, they raised it up to 1.25. So that is something that is very clear to me. And I want to actually point out to what Mr. Bennett said out here is that 2 years back, there was no bus, and now he has a bus. And of course, we improve. There are places where we could make a better position of that. Buses are late, and we are getting better every year. And a quick thing about, I'm running out of time, about the intentional integration is that we passed this intentional integration in 2020. This is third year of our integration, and all schools are neighborhood schools. We do
Thank you.
not have anything else to do that.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Steffen, next to answer the question.
Thank you. I very strongly support the intentional integration initiative, and I think every board member ought to be a faithful steward of that program. But students have to get to school on time. That's really a non-negotiable. It sadly hadn't happened, and students were on long bus rides, and we had all kinds of issues this year. We had similar problems last year. And if you're a parent whose student is not being provided the adequate transportation and it's not working, I mean, this is a massive issue for you, and you're probably rightly frustrated about it. I'm grateful that our new superintendent is working really hard to work out transportation issues. My understanding is he is in the transportation office every single day trying to work this out. I don't think it's the role of the board to micromanage transportation issues, but it is the role of the board to provide oversight, to provide support, and to push the administration to be a little more proactive on this. Sadly, on this, as in many issues, we are a little too reactive. We wait till problems to happen. We need to be thinking a little more ahead, and transportation is one example of that.
Thank you. Ms. Brown, same question.
Sure. And I just want to correct the record in a way, because I do think the incumbents running did say that transportation has been a success and that transportation is not a hardship. And I completely disagree with that. Transportation can be a hardship, and it can also be a hardship the fact that we have some schools that start at 8 a.m. and some schools that start at 9 a.m. Trying to get a child to school at 9 a.m. can be very difficult for a working parent. So as a board member, while yes, I agree we cannot micromanage, we can certainly look at data to see what are, is this making any progress on our achievement gap? What are the impacts? Dr. Fergus in his report specifically said we should be watching to make sure there aren't disproportional impacts on low socioeconomic families as well as families of color. We should be looking at that. And as a board, we should then use that to implement policies that are more pragmatic, cost-effective, and also support families. And yes, I believe we should try and keep students in neighborhoods together.
Thank you. Ms. Joseph, next.
Well, there's a lot to unpack there. I'm a big proponent of the III. I would like to point out that in 1981, when I graduated from then Jefferson School, 6th grade, I was the last class to do so. That's when the Marshall Jefferson program started. That was 43 years ago, folks, and we're still working on this. We're in our third year. It is going well. That I stand by, because I've looked at the data, I've looked at the PowerPoints and the presentations that are on the Board of Ed website. You cannot continue to talk about having integration and then on the other side say, but you can choose your neighborhood school. You have to commit as a community that we are going to do this because our schools, every single school needs to reflect the diversity of our community. That is why I chose SOMA, for the diversity. I did not choose SOMA to send my kids to the local school.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett, Same question.
This has been a very important issue for me for 2.5 or 3 years. Thank you for asking it. The board doesn't get to manage transportation, but transportation is consistent with certain policies the board sets. For instance, like the board could adjust policy 5120 about student placement to also give a directive to the administration to consider transportation pragmatism in placements. That would mean, hopefully be interpreted as not having isolated placements, because if there's just one child in a neighborhood going to a particular school, they're really hard to bus. Another area the board could improve this is actually work to get more buses serving the K-5 routes. I was talking about pre-K busing earlier. Like if we were more strategic with pre-K placement so that we didn't need as much pre-K busing, we could have more buses on pre-K routes and that would speed them by quite a lot. We also have to look at the next 2 years because there are 2 more cohorts of III kids at place, like, because we don't have 4th and 5th graders placed by the III now. So we actually have to look at actually what our transportation needs are going to be like next year and the year after that. As for families who live very close to us.
I'm sorry. I know it's a big issue. Last, Dr. I'll get it. I'm still working on the last name. Dr. Telesford, right?
When we talk about the III, we have to remember that, as Bethany said, we've been doing this since the 1980s. Integration is something this community has always done, and we've always had different ways of rezoning or taking this wedge and sending them to this school, and it really hasn't worked. The III does work because we now have schools that reflect the diversity of our community. And one thing we have to make sure is that we don't place the burden of integration on a single community. Because if we have this whole idea of everyone can choose their neighborhood school or be their closest, we're going to have a situation where some people actually do have to travel further if we're going to balance our schools. And that will mean that certain communities will have the burden. And that means places like Hilton near South Boyden and Newstead near South Mountain will carry the burden of integrating the school system. And when you consider an area like Hilton where they have lower socioeconomic status, many people will have tougher or greater challenges in getting their kids to school. And the other thing to consider is that we have a lawsuit in the state where the state of New Jersey was sued for segregation in our schools.
Okay.
And
I'm going to have to let you finish that with the next question, which is related. Thank you on that topic. So this question will be answered first by Mr. Valdemani. Okay, sorry. I got the doctor, now I'll work on yours. All right, so you all were, it was kind of impossible not to, but you were all talking about the II initiative. So we're going to go right there. Here's the question. We are now in the 3rd phase of the Intentional Integration Initiative III. What do you think the board can do to ensure that this critical initiative is successful for the district? As a BOE member, how will you work to improve student achievement overall and address the disparities we currently see among the different demographic groups? Mr. Vadlamani.
Achievement gap is a multi-factor problem where it is not going to be solved by having just one knob that you turn and magically it goes away. But intentional integration certainly is going to help move the needle forward. With intentional integration, we no longer have neighborhood schools. All our schools look alike. All our schools are equally affluent. I mean, I remember when my daughter was in 5th grade at then Jefferson and now Bolden, I mean, they needed a playground and they raised $100,000 in like a week. Before I could even go to my link and click, say, to donate, it was done. It was a rich school. Same thing in Seth Boyden. At the same time, they would give out backpacks to children because they didn't have enough. But now, because of intentional integration, that is no longer true. All our schools look the same. All our schools have the same amount of ability to raise money and spend money on children. So that way now they can focus on the core academics as opposed to all the other things that are around it.
Thank you. Ms. Brown, same question.
Yes, so I think that in terms of how I, as a board member, would continue to address student achievement overall, For me, it is about, well, what I already discussed is continuing to evaluate the data in terms of the intentional integration initiative we started with busing the students and making sure there's not disproportionate impacts. But also, I think the key is to implement and make progress on the recommendations from our equity audit. That is our best roadmap for making progress on our achievement gap. And I fully support having a committee on the BOE to monitor that, to have timeframes, milestones, so that we can ensure that we are trying to make progress in this important area. Mixing up students doesn't equate to equity. A lot more effort is needed.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett, same question.
The III has been implemented with a lot of socioeconomic and racial disparities, but we should actually look at it also from the position of an individual household. There are white families, there are black families for whom getting a bus is a good thing or a neutral thing. And there are white families and black families for whom getting a bus is actually unusable or a deep emotional blow because they live very, very close to a school and now they can't go to it on foot. One thing we can do to reduce the disparities in placement is actually, look at the sizes of the different elementary schools. For the last 3 years, Seth Boyden was very small. I think it only had like 60 kids in its kindergarten. For this current year, they've enlarged it to 105, which is probably going to eliminate the disparities for this kindergarten, although that 105 kindergarten is probably not sustainable for Seth Boyden. And it also required reducing Clinton's kindergarten to only 55 kids, which is even less sustainable. So we can look at the size of the schools. Also, the administration made South Mountain one section smaller for this year. I think they have 95 kindergartners. So that would also reduce the disparities. As for academics, I support the Fergus recommendations, of course. I would also advocate for more of a content-rich curriculum for elementary schools.
Thank you. Ms. Joseph. The same question.
Thank you. The outcomes across the country for integration initiatives are really, really uniform, consistent. Students in integrated schools tend to have higher test scores. That's all the students, not just the students who are being bused. The entire school rises. They have stronger critical thinking skills. They are less likely to develop racial stereotypes or prejudices. That's the kind of world we've been trying to build. I don't want to do rose-colored glasses, but that's a big part of why we chose these towns. I think that it's incredibly important that we, as board members, don't come in and throw the baby out with the bathwater or rock what is actually working. So as a board member, if I were to be elected, coming in and supporting the superintendent, supporting the continued III, and yes, looking at busing and making sure that we're doing it smarter and cheaper.
Thank you. Dr. Telesford, same question.
I think if you want to support the III, we don't dismantle it. I think that's the most important thing. Trying to change the balance of the schools when we actually already have balance is a problem. I was talking about there was a lawsuit where the state of New Jersey was sued because they said our schools were segregated, and the judge agreed with that, and they are currently in mediation. And this is an area where our district is ahead of the curve. Other communities look at us as a model, and we have to consider the idea of changing around the III to, bring people closer to their schools means we're going to see no balance in our schools again. And what that means is the state will come in and say, okay, then I'll do it for you. We've already moved ahead and done something, and we're a model, and I think we should continue that and continue supporting that. Part of that also includes providing more professional developments that our teachers can work with students, because now they have a heterogeneous classroom. They need to recognize that students are coming from all walks of life. But part of that also requires us to create feedback mechanisms so that we can get input from our teachers so that we can improve on helping students in the classroom.
Thank you. Mr. Steffen.
Thank you. Sadly, we still have a significant opportunity gap in this district, and the integration initiative is one piece of addressing that. It's not the only thing, but it's an important piece. Well, where do we go from here? Luckily, we have Dr. Fergus, who's done quite an extensive study of our district and has come up with a number of recommendations, and the board really needs to focus on working with the superintendent to implement those recommendations. And there's a number of them, but they include rigorous curriculum and rigorous classes across the curriculum. Includes attracting and retaining a diverse workforce. It comes down to really fundamentally, one of the fundamental pieces is making sure that all students feel welcomed and accepted in their learning environment. And that's not just what we owe them as human beings, but we know from Maslow, people don't learn very well if they don't feel safe and supported. So the board really needs to keep its eye on this. It needs to be pressing the superintendent to be making progress on this. We need to collect data. We need sub-goals so that we can really track this and make sure it's a point of emphasis for us.
Thank you. And last, Mr. Kapadia.
So I think similar to the last question, right, when we've been talking about the III, we've been talking about transportation. And so what I would like to see is actually us get past the transportation. If that is mission accomplished, as some of our friends here have said, or we've gotten that part, then I'd like to see the progress on getting towards some of the other areas of closing the achievement gap. You know, and I also think that when we think about real equity or true equity, we have to look at the whole student experience, and actually starts with the teachers in the classrooms, because they're the ones that need to be equipped with the ability to deal with the heterogeneous schools. But it's also not just academics. It's arts, it's athletics, it's the full experience that we have to be looking at. And it's I actually agree with Paul, what he was saying, right? With the rigor in the classroom, the various disciplines that we can get to in terms of the arts, the musics, the G&T programs, the ensuring that we've got special education back to the basics and serving that. That is how you get the full equity and achievement gap closed.
Thank you. Thank you. So these are two questions I've kind of combined from the audience. They're similar, yet a little different. So you, as candidates, can figure out how you want to approach it. Mr. Steffen, you will be the first to go. I'm going to read them both. And if you want to frame it how you feel appropriate framing it, but it captures two different points. The first question is, how do you feel the newness of the superintendent and senior leadership team would affect your service on the board? And the second part is, it's a little hard to read, so I hope I get it right. The incumbents discuss continuity and stability being key points of why they should be reelected. But yet there's chaos and issues that have happened on their watch. New superintendent, failed budget, principal of CHS. Why will it be any different? I know they're different, but they touched on some similar topics, so I hope you don't mind me putting them together. Mr. Steffen.
Sure, that question might have been longer than a minute, and I will try to answer it in less than a minute. I think we actually have a great opportunity this year. We have a new superintendent. We have Frank Sanchez back at the high school. We're going to have a new business administrator. We now have a fully staffed special services department, which when Mr. Bing came in July, only had one person working there. So I think we have a big opportunity. And I agree that we need to have some stability. We've had a lot of turnover in the upper levels of administration, and it's made it very difficult for us to build consistent practices. Now, how do you keep people here? Well, it's about the environment, partly that the board creates, partly that the community creates here. I actually heard from a local leader a few months ago when the superintendent job was up, who said that, word had sort of gotten around that people don't want to apply to work here. How many good people are we missing out on because of a sort of toxic environment that's been created? And I don't put the blame for that on the incumbents necessarily. I will note that they voted against removing the last superintendent, but we do need to work on those relationships.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett, same question.
I would agree that the Board of Education itself has had a lot of problems the last few years, although I think the problems on the Board of Education started before Vadlamani and Telford joined it. I would think that the problems with the Board of Education really started in 2020, when Board of Education members voted for a very unusual mandatory assignment of integration plan, which was the opposite of what they had campaigned on. They had campaigned on actually giving parents a choice role in it. So the plan they passed actually was just flat out what they had been against. And I think actually they didn't quite understand how the III would work when they voted for it in 2020. I would also say there were problems in 2021 when the board acted like semi-secretly to unconditionally ban transfers by III kids and then to eliminate so-called courtesy busing for Marshall Bolden and Seth Boyden. last few years, like we have also seen problems like this Sanchez non-renewal was, and then like the trial was like the worst thing. But, we've had a lot of arguing, a lot of rudeness. We've had a lot of like wheel spinning. We've had a lot of things the district has done.
Thank you. Mr. Kapadia, same question.
I think the definition of stability is not always something that's going to happen overnight, right? These are impacts that actually happen based upon things that have happened either in the prior years or the previous year before that. And I think I find it curious that we're talking about stability and the incumbents talking about that, because at some point you have to look at the voting records and the voting policies that were produced, that were supported by the incumbents that led to a lot of the instability. In fact, there were destabilizing type votes that were made. The voting to retain the former ineffective superintendent and the business administrator that led to a $9.5 million deficit in a surprise year that we found out late in the spring. Voting for a budget that lacked transparency, that cutted the arts to 28 staff, including the director of guidance, that led to the instability in the scheduling this year. A rushed policy to potentially de-level the district on removing honors and advanced classes, also destabilizing. Ignoring the transportation problems that we need to address in part of the III, also destabilizing.
Thank you. Dr. Telesford, same question.
Can you just repeat the second part of that question?
Oh, yes. Okay. The incumbents discuss continuity and stability being very, very key points of why they should be reelected, but the chaos and issues happened on their watch. New superintendent, failed budget, principal on CHS. Why will it be any different now?
Well, I think when we talk about the chaos, yes, that happened on our watch because we were dealing with the downstream effects of previous decisions and actions by board members. We look at someone like Frank Sanchez. He was targeted not once, but twice in the year prior. And when I came in January as board president, we had to deal with him being plucked out of the high school and watching the downstream effects of that, which is what we saw with the high school scheduling, which has nothing to do with budget, but has to do with destabilizing the high school. Same with the new superintendent. We looked at how decisions by the board affected our ability to bring in administration. For instance, when they pulled the superintendent out a week before an election, that caused us to lose candidates in our special education department, which, as we saw, has affected our budget. So yes, we have seen chaos. But one thing that we bring now is we want to ensure that there is stability because we need to support our administrators because then we can build a foundation and move our district forward.
Thank you. Mr. Vadalamani.
So the only thing I want to thank Mr. Bennett for is he actually agrees that 100% of everything, all the chaos that happened before we joined the board. He talked about 2020, 2021, 2022. We were not in leadership. Fantastic. Thank you. Just to remind everyone that we are dealing with all the mess that was created in the previous years, and we're cleaning up. Of course, it happened when we were in leadership. He was the president, I'm the first vice president, of course. But the thing is, we've cleaned it up. We've hired a really good superintendent who's going to do the thing. And don't forget, between the time when the two so-called votes were put out, 11 administrators quit. That's 25% of the administrators quit. They resigned or retired willingly because they don't want to deal with the board. So I think that is the most important thing we need to change. And that is why stability is the number one thing that we've been focusing on since we decided to run for this office.
Thank you. Ms. Joseph, next, same question.
Thank you. Stability, yes. It is something that doesn't happen overnight. Every year we replace 3 board members, 1/3 of the board. We have not had people particularly often wanting to stay on the board. It is a volunteer job, and it is a tough one. I've been to a number of board meetings now. Overall, it's been calm. The meetings have been far shorter than I thought they would be. But the stability piece really, I think, for me, goes to we have 2 board members who are willing to stay on. I'm running with them quite intentionally. They have more institutional knowledge and history than 13 administrators in the schools right now, and it would be 15, but we have 2 open positions. I think that's incredibly important, and to continue on the path that we're on.
Thank you. Last, Ms. Brown.
You know, I think from COVID forward, our temperatures have been high, right? My own temperature has been high since COVID. I think we all are still coming off of the trauma, and having a superintendent that was extremely ineffectual and broke a lot of trust with students, parents, and teachers. And so we are in a rebuilding phase. And part of what we would need to do, if elected to the board, is try and lower the temperature. And we do that by engaging with each other, engaging with our teachers, engaging with our parents, engaging with our students, not pushing them away. In fact, Bimmel, Jeff and I have already met with our student reps who are on the BOE because we know how important that engagement is. And also, I think we need to hold ourselves accountable as board members. If we make mistakes, which we likely will, admit to it. That's what leadership is about. And then admit your mistake and work with the community to figure out how to move forward.
Thank you. This will be, I believe, our last question, so we have time to do closing comments. This one we received a few questions on, so we've decided to do it. You have so many important issues to talk about. It's hard to cover everything. But this is on special education. And Ms. Joseph, you'll be first. Special education students make up 15% of all students in our district. And yet families in our district know very little about the needs, accommodations, or services offered. Please describe your experience with or knowledge of special ed and what strategies you would support to bridge the gap or eliminate the silos that can develop between general ed and special ed. Ms. Joseph.
Thank you. Actually, we worked on a CPAC questionnaire just recently, and they actually cited students with IEPs and 504 plans make up 25% of our students, not 15. 15 is more of a statewide average. It's where we really have to go back to basics. We have to start where every student is. It's a social work tenet. Be where your client is. Start where that student is. I have experience with this and have permission from my 2 kids to mention. They have both had 504s. My daughter now has an IEP. Working with special services has been challenging at times. We are now fully staffed in that department, and I think it'll be much better. And I think working very closely with an organization like CPAC, especially now that we have a standing committee for special services on the board, is going to be very, very productive for us.
Thank you. Mr. Kapadia. Same question.
So I would say the experience I've with the special education has been a learning experience during this campaign. And I think speaking with parents on the campaign front, sitting in the CPAC monthly meeting, hearing the stories and the strength that the parents have to put themselves through to advocate for their kids is incredible. It's heartbreaking, it's angering, and it's saddening at the same time. The basics have to be met at the special education level. The amount of navigation and problems that they have just to get an IEP or get an email back or find out who their case manager is it's not sustainable. We can't even think about what's next for the special education program until we actually just start from the beginning of the stuff. There's 15 open positions. The communication you hear from all the parents is that it's not great. And I think it starts with the leadership. We have a new assistant superintendent of special education, good start. We have a new school superintendent, another good start. But we have to go through there.
Thank you. Mr. Valdamani.
So I grew up in India where there was, very minimal to no testing for any learning disabilities. And most children were either undiagnosed or were put away into, other schools. I mean, obviously that is why, at least for our slate of, Kwawi, Bethany and I, we want to ensure that the core of public school system is where we have special ed and general ed not treated as separate problems, but to put together and treated as a continuum of abilities, right? So that's number one. The constant churn that we've had has always been, and it's just terrible. We've had 8 assistant superintendents of special services in as many years. And we actually voted to have an internal audit to make sure that we understand where we are lacking, because to measure is to know. So now that we have the gaps, if you will, it'll be easier to go back and fix them all with the new superintendent and the new assistant superintendent, Dr. Jesumaria. Thanks.
Thank you. Ms. Bennett, same question. Or Mr. Bennett, I'm sorry, same question.
So I think I do have personal experience with special education, both as myself and for my kids. I won't go into too much detail on it, but I'll say that we really benefited from having an inclusion class. One of my children was placed at random in an inclusion class, and it turned out that she needed a little bit of extra help too. And it was diagnosed very quickly just because of that random luck, and she got the services she needed very quickly and very reliably because of that random luck. So the fact that we started this school year without an inclusion class in every grade in every school is something very upsetting to me. And when I look at the fact that we do have 15 special education vacancies, which is posted in the hallway of this building, it worries me a lot, because I know it means that a lot of kids aren't getting the services they need. When no one's available to teach them, kids can't be taught. As for improving special education, one of the board's biggest roles is the budget. The board has to look at the budget and actually see where it can actually spend money more efficiently for the biggest benefit. And when I think of savings in the budget, special education is a priority for where I'd want that more money, additional money to go.
Thank you. Ms. Brown, same question.
Yeah, like Bimal, much of my experience with special education has been listening to parents on this campaign, and it has been extremely impactful. I'm not sure where all the problems are, but certainly it seems like communication and accountability play a role. And looking at the federal audit of our program, I can say communication and accountability and lack of standard operating procedures certainly play a role. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of the audit that our district did, because I think that those two audits should be a roadmap for how we can try to get this department back on track so that it can serve all kids and meet and provide the services that they deserve. And it also aligns with recommendations from Dr. Fergus, because in his report, he also commented on how support services varied across elementary schools. It doesn't make sense that parents have to work so hard, often hiring an attorney to get the supports they need. That doesn't serve anyone.
Thank you. Dr. Telesford, same question.
So in my second year, I served as the chair of special services, and I was also liaison to CPAC. And so one of the very first discussions or conversations I had with a parent was they did not like to see the revolving door of administrators that they see as in the assistant superintendent role. And so what they really were pleading for is please bring us some stability, because every time an assistant superintendent changes, we get impacted most. And so one of the things that I did when I joined or was on this committee was make sure that we really look at the data and understand how our students are placed. And that led to moving towards this audit, and finally we can look at this audit and start to make some real reforms in the department. But I think one of the major ways that we can really move forward is not think of special education as this separate thing. One of the things that we're doing right now is, or at least the administration is doing, is they've changed INRS to have this idea of a student that is on the spectrum, where they're going to need some areas where they're going to need some enrichment and help, and and you need to balance that, because not all students are, special education versus gifted. It can be all one student, and we have to see where there are deficits and how can we help those students.
Thank you. And last, Mr. Steffen.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was actually speaking to a parent just the other day about students that both have IEPs and are in gifted and talented. And that really shouldn't be so surprising, because every student has strengths and weaknesses, places where they excel and places where they need some help. I think teachers sort of get that and do their best in their own classroom to try to meet the needs of every student. It's what I tried to do when I was a teacher, but teachers can't do it alone. They need structures. They need help from the administration, and this goes partly to having some stability in the special services department so we can build up consistent practices. I'd be interested, as Deirdre mentioned, to see what the special ed audit looks like when it comes out next week. There is work we can do, but look, if you're a parent of a special education student, you shouldn't feel like you are advocating for your student all by yourself. You should feel like you should have a community in the school with the teachers, with aides, with the administration to get your student what they need and what they are entitled to under law.
Thank you. I'm going to do something a little different that I haven't done before in recognition of a nice full audience. I'm going to have you do closing comments, but then I'm going to I know that the streaming will end at 9, but I'm going to go and continue 1 or 2 more questions for the benefit of the audience to encourage our voters to come out to these meetings and see that those who do come out get the advantage of another question. So we're going to do that after the closing, but we're going to officially have the closing so for the streaming to end. So we're going to start with Mr. Kapadia. I believe that you went last, so you can start with your closing comments.
I'm running because I'm an optimist, and this district is full of potential. We have a new superintendent in Mr. Bing, a symbol of progress in leadership. Newly elected board members in this year can provide the opportunity for new energy and support for our district, superintendent, teachers, parents, and students. We are at an inflection point. I'm really excited to be running with Deirdre Brown and Jeff Bennett. We are a great alchemy of empathy, tenacity, and enthusiasm. Jeff's a data whiz and a former board member. Deirdre's the policy expert, holding the government accountable for a living. And together we have 30 years in the community and children that have attended pre-K to 12th grade. This experience allows us to evaluate policies and conduct board governance from a parent's perspective, which contributes greatly to our shared vision of growth and accountability in our schools, with student outcomes as our beacon. I know what this district can be. It's why we moved here years ago. I'm running for Board of Ed because I can listen, communicate, and represent what parents are thinking, feeling, and saying, but not always heard.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett.
Thank you very much. I'd like to address a few things that were said in tonight's debate. One is that, Deirdre, Bimmel, and I want to somehow unravel or dismantle the III. Nothing could be further from the truth. We are all very committed to having an integration plan for this district, but we believe that the version of the III passed in 2020 isn't something heaven sent, isn't something infallible. The only part of the III, we're willing to look at is actually the precedence of schools that a child with a good lottery number would go to. Right now, it's determined by a proximity assumption, where it's just assumed that child should go to the closest or second closest or third closest school. We would actually be willing to look at what the Cambridge and Montclair and Berkeley do, where actually parents have a role in determining that precedence, because all families are different. We are not willing to look at the seat control, which is plus or minus 5% now. That seat control, also known as variance, is what guarantees integration. And that is sacrosanct. That we're not going to look at all. It's also ironic that we were being criticized for this because, what we're open to is actually what board members in the late 2010s were running on for the III.
Thank you. Ms. Brown.
Thank you for having us tonight. I think the Brown-Bennett-Kapadia slate brings new leadership that will support our superintendent as he begins to address the challenges in our district. Our slate is about getting our district back to basics and getting those basics right. Busing, budget, guidance, scheduling. It's also about collaboration and taking the temperature down, bringing in our wonderful community to help solve some of our problems. And it's about a focus on academics and the whole student. That means diverse class offerings, making progress on our special education and equity recommendations. It means building back the arts, a pride and joy of our community. And it means having facilities and fields for our student athletes that they deserve and provide a sense of pride for our community. We are simply parents. We have no agenda except for to serve our students and try to get our district back on track.
Thank you. Dr. Telesford.
So as you consider your support for board candidates, I want you to think about what is important to moving us forward. We move forward by continuing to forge relationships between board members, administrators, teachers, community leaders, local organizations, and community members. Those collaborations are critical to ensuring all students can thrive. I am fully committed to working with our superintendent to lay a strong foundation. I've worked with Arun, and he has helped create that strong foundation. And Bethany, who is a devoted community member and leader, she has board experience and will be ready on day one. Across us, we have 88 years of residency in this community, And we have experience with the school district from the 1970s continuing to now. And I just welcome my daughter, my second daughter, my daughter, and I will be in with this district until 2042. So I am fully invested in this community. So with that, I just ask that you select 5, 6, and 7 on the ballot, and we want to promote a slate that will remain supportive of the whole student.
Thank you, Dr. Valdemine. Mr. Valdemine.
Yeah, I don't have a PhD, sorry.
For a moment, you did.
So, as a resident of South Orange for 21 years, longer than anywhere else I've been, I'm deeply committed to our children's growth and success. My family is a lifelong public school family, with my oldest graduated from CHS this year and my second one starting as a freshman. I firmly believe that every child in our school district should have opportunities to fulfill their goals and go on to change the world. Being on a board is a responsibility I take seriously, and my record shows that I'm willing to listen, collaborate, and work hard for good outcomes. This election season, I'm asking all of you to vote for me and my friends, Kwawi and Bethany, so that we can finish the long-range facilities plan, among many other things, and continue charting a steady course towards stability in our school district. I urge you to vote for ballot numbers 5, 6, and 7. I want to thank the President's Council. I want to thank Nicole and Ildi and the League of Women Voters and my fellow candidates for this opportunity to share my platform and the vision for the BOE. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Joseph.
Oh, I had so many things I wanted to say tonight. A minute is tough. I put a lot of time and effort and thought into running for the board. I have a lot to lose. My reputation, my business has my name on it. So putting my neck out there for the community that I love, I wasn't so sure until I sat and met with Kwawi and Arun. We have very different skill sets that we bring to the table. They've got the experience of being on the board already, having hired Mr. Bing, joining them with my board experience and my slightly different take on the world. I want them to stay on, to keep building. They've shown steady leadership and calm. Much of the chaos has been eliminated by the board, although it remains interesting to see the politicking that goes on, which I simply believe has no place on the Board of Education. We have a tremendous community. In our district, when we talk about the district, we're all the district, including our teachers.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, Mr. Steffen.
We talked about a lot of issues tonight. How do we actually make progress on them? For me, it all comes down to relationships. The board's power is limited. It's the superintendent and ultimately teachers who actually educate students. Our impact as a board only goes so far as our relationships with those professionals. I know how to build strong relationships. It's what I do in my job as an environmental lawyer, working with powerful attorneys on the other side to get things done. As a former teacher, I know the challenges educators face. I know what they need to succeed. As the only independent candidate here, I'm committed to working with every single one of the other board members. We've got to get these relationships right. We've got to do it this year because we have a new superintendent, because we're going to have a new business administrator, because we now have a fully staffed special services department. This is our moment to build the partnerships that we need. I know we can do it if we work together. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to be the moderator from the League of Women Voters. I want to thank the candidates for their participation, to let the voters know where you stand on the issues that are important to them and to get to know you a little better. And I want to thank the audience that came out here in person, as well as those watching online. It is, as a representative for the League of Women Voters, most crucial for me to remind all of you to remember and to remind your friends and family to vote. This is an important election for you and for your community. We're going to thank those who joined us live on streaming, and to those of you who are here, if the candidates don't mind, I did have another topic that they wanted covered, and I think it's an important one that typically gets covered by the BOE. So is it okay if we do one more question and go around? Is that okay? Okay, we'll make it quick. It's on financial oversight. And the question is, and we have a few times, so I'm going to read the two parts. And we will have Dr. Tellis-Ford go first. And the question is, financial resources are limited and the district has a lot of needs. How would you help the BOE and the district prioritize spending and initiatives? And what measures would you take as an advocate for the board to ensure transparency and accountability in the district's budget allocation? Further, financial oversight of our district's budget is critical. What experience do you have managing large, complex budgets, and how would you work to ensure that district's financial resources are used effectively and efficiently? Dr. Tellisford.
So one of the things that we have, I guess, an opportunity this year is that the budget calendar begins in the fall. So when the new superintendent began, we had discussions about how do we bring about more transparency, bringing the community in, and the new superintendent has lots of ideas about how we can bring more transparency and community participation into our budget. So that's one thing that we will be working on this year. We will be revealing, or not revealing, but presenting a new budget calendar for the year. In terms of oversight, I think a lot of that involves trusting your administrators and then also asking questions. One of the things that we instituted is that we have budget workshops in which during the budget season, we bring in all board members to come in and to discuss the budget.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Brown. Same question.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think it's extremely important, given that we had $9.5 million deficit, and we don't really seem to have answers on how that occurred. What were the assumptions made? Did we not plan ahead? And I know that Jeff is going to talk about some cost savings ideas that we have, so I'll focus on improving oversight and transparency. I do believe the board has a role to ensure a clear and transparent budget process. I would support more open reporting to the public, including maybe town halls where budget information can be shared and the public can provide input. Clearly, for our budget, we need to prioritize any money going into the classrooms and focus on student outcomes. And we need to think about our budget consequences. The director of guidance cut, major consequence at the high school. The selling of our buses, major consequence in terms of not being able to fund field trips. Not thinking about this CHS stage in our facilities plan, major consequence.
Thank you. Ms. Joseph, same question.
Thank you. I'm going to start with my experience working on budgets. So as a director at an outpatient behavioral health program, I manage large federal grants. I don't know if anyone else in the room has, but basically you get the money and you need to say how you're going to spend it, and then you best spend it that way, because if you don't, they take it back. And then your boss isn't so happy with you because you gave money back. You have to spend it to the dollar. So it takes a great deal of time and effort to track everything. It takes communication with your budget department. It takes communication with your boots on the ground to make sure money is being spent the way you intended it to be spent, and you have to report back to the government every single month. We need to have a full-time business administrator or assistant business administrator on staff. It is a very large deficit for us to not have that. Get that department restaffed has to be a priority. And
Thank
yes, I
you.
believe in the transparency of the budget process.
Thank you. Mr. Kapadia.
Same thing, potato. So in terms of experience with budget, I've actually got a lot of good working experience with budgets. And in fact, I've managed budgets probably close to what the school budget is, and not too far below it either over my career. I think I echo my running mates here in terms of the transparency. I'm going to leave Jeff to go through the actual cost savings things and where we can find some cash into the district. But the basics thing here is that it's not that complicated, and that one of the biggest shortfalls that we had is that shortcomings that we had is we did not have a multi-year budgeting process. It is not hard in any business or any organization or anything that you're doing to have at least a 3 to 5 year plan. You can have assumptions, you can make adjustments along the way, but the public and the constituents that you serve deserve to see that type of thinking. So it's pretty short-sighted that we didn't have that. So therefore, the easiest thing I would do is go towards a multi-year budget. Town halls with the public, just like this, to go through the budget. FAQs that are easy to see and understand are pretty easy methods to get the budget right.
Thank you. Mr. Vadlamir.
So one of the problems with well, okay, let me give you my experience first. I mean, I work in a large complex organization and we have budgets that go for tens of billions of dollars, but clearly, I don't know if anyone else has handled this. Our budget is like $180 million. So it is a couple of orders of magnitude larger than what people have normally done. And we do have robust reporting that happens every month. But the problem is that those reports are dense and they probably require an advanced degree in accounting to understand. I mean, I don't have one, but it is pretty dense and to figure out. So one of the easiest ways to kind of bridge the gap is to have more retreats where we do training for board members on how to look at those reports and figure out what's happening. And there's another problem that happens, which is typical for our school district, is that the budget actually belongs to two different boards. The previous board that starts off in the first 6 months and hands it over to the next board that has it for the next 6 months. Now, obviously, when that happens, some of the issues that happened in the first 6 months are reflected in the second 6 months. And that is why you see a lot of things that show up in the budget. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Bennett.
As a member of the Board of Education, a few years ago, yes, I did have a lot of experience with the budget. I was on FFT for a year and a half, and I followed the budget very closely. I also have a tremendous amount of experience studying large amounts of money because I was an activist for Fair State Aid after my board term. I was a research director for a grassroots group called the Fair Funding Action Committee. And when we started out, like superintendents, boards of education, legislatures, journalists had a very, very bad understanding of how New Jersey state aid law worked. And through years of activism, we actually got people to understand what was unfair about our state aid law and why SAFRA couldn't be implemented as it was originally planned in 2008. As for our budget, I've already talked about some of the savings I think we can make, but we also can do things to save money and bring in more money by utilizing the additional space from the long-range facilities plan. We added 45 more classrooms, but our enrollment is down by 800 compared to what it's projected to be when the LRFP was passed. We have to do something with those rooms. And there could be pre-K
Well,
in.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mr. Steffen, you're going to wrap up this line of questioning.
We need better processes around our budget. Right now, as Bimal mentioned, we only look at the immediate budget year. We need multi-year budget forecasting. We need to start the budget process early, as Dr. Telsford said. I think it ought to start in September, and that's because the superintendent needs to have time to evaluate ideas that the board has, and so that we can have a lot of time to think about what our possible options are. We need the kinds of analyses that are actually informative. You'll see on the district website, there's something called a user-friendly budget. That's required by the state, so it's not anybody's fault, but it is not exactly user-friendly. And I'm pleased to see this year, for the first time in a couple years, the district has published something called a cost center view that actually shows you how much money are we spending on the arts or on transportation or on special ed. There is no quick fix on the budget. Let's just make that clear. The board needs the time. It needs the right analyses to try to make the wisest decisions. And so that's why I've tried to focus on better budget processes.
Thank you. I want to tell the audience, first of all, thank you for being a wonderful audience. Your focus on really listening and staying present and allowing each of the candidates to speak really made a difference, I know, for myself and for all the candidates. So I want to thank you. And I hope that you continue to come out like you have tonight and show your support for the board. It means a lot to them. And to go back and tell your friends about the live stream, that they can see the information that was presented. So first and foremost, I really want to thank our audience. I also, you have a tough choice. You have a wonderful, outstanding group of committed parents who want to serve on your board. And you are very fortunate, and I will say you have a tough decision coming up at this election. And I think either way, you're going to be a very lucky community to have this representative of board members who really care and are focused and committed to helping you. And then finally, I just want to thank you all for staying beyond the time, allowing this really important financial question that was important to everyone. And they had a lot of great questions, and it's to your credit that you had such meaningful, thoughtful answers to each of them. So I wanted to let you know that I thoroughly enjoyed being here with you. I think you should all walk out feeling very proud of how the forum went tonight, and I wish you all sincere luck in the upcoming election. Thank you all, and don't forget to vote. How do I turn this off? I turned it on for you. That button. Yeah.